My father was a firefighter for 22 years, and the one thing he drilled into me before anything else, before how to change a tire or how to shake a man's hand, was this: you don't walk past someone who needs help. You just don't. I don't know if that's why I stopped that night. Probably. But I also think some part of me knew, even before I understood what I was looking at, that walking away wasn't something I'd be able to live with. My name is Garrett Holloway. I'm a structural engineer at Caldwell & Fitch, a mid-size architecture and construction firm based in Denver, Colorado. I'd been there 4 years, long enough to know where the good coffee was, short enough that I still had something to prove. I was 34, single, and I worked late more nights than I didn't. That particular Tuesday in October, I was walking back to my car in the parking structure on Larimer Street, after a dinner alone at a Thai place I liked, when I heard it, a sound like something between a cough and a gasp, coming from the stairwell exit. I pushed the door open. A woman was sitting on the concrete floor with her back against the wall, one heel on, one heel somewhere else entirely, her blazer hanging off one shoulder. She wasn't unconscious, but she wasn't far from it either. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and there was a small cut above her eyebrow, the kind you get from grazing a railing or a wall on the way down, not deep bleeding. I crouched down. "Hey, can you hear me?" She looked at me like I was standing at the end of a very long hallway. "Do you want me to call someone?" I asked. "No," she said, clear as anything. Then her eyes drifted shut again. I sat there for a second, running through my options. She'd fallen. She was alone. It was 9:40 at night in a parking garage, and the next person to come through that door might not stop. I checked her wrist. Pulse was steady. No signs of anything beyond the obvious. I pulled out my phone and called for a non-emergency medical line, described what I was seeing, and they walked me through a quick check. Nothing alarming, they said. Likely alcohol and a minor fall. Keep her awake, keep her sitting upright, and get her somewhere safe. Somewhere safe. Easy to say. Her bag was on the floor beside her, contents half spilled. I found her phone, cracked screen locked, found a business card tucked in the outer pocket. The name on it was hers, I assumed. Lydia Marsh, Senior Associate, Caldwell & Fitch. I stared at it for a moment. Caldwell & Fitch. My company. I'd never met anyone named Lydia Marsh, but that wasn't unusual. We had 2 floors and about 90 people. I turned the card over, blank on the back. I looked at her again, really looked, and thought that she might have been at the awards dinner earlier that evening. The one I'd skipped because I had a deadline and no patience for networking events with rubber chicken and speeches about synergy. I couldn't leave her on a concrete floor in a parking garage. I got her into my car. She was more cooperative than I expected. She could walk slowly, with my arm under hers. I buckled her in, rolled the window down slightly, and drove carefully. She gave me her address in a moment of surprising coherence somewhere around Colfax, then went quiet again. I got her to her building, helped her to her door, and she managed the key herself. I made sure the door was open and the lights were on before I walked back to my car. That was it. I drove home, made a cup of tea, and went to bed. I didn't think much of it. Thursday morning, my colleague Trent stopped by my desk with the particular expression he wore when he had information he was enjoying too much. "Did you hear about the Marsh situation?" he said, dropping into the chair beside my monitor. "No idea what you're talking about, Lydia Marsh. You know her?" I kept my eyes on my screen. "I know the name. She's Martin Caldwell's daughter." I turned to look at him. Martin Caldwell, as in the Caldwell of Caldwell & Fitch, as in the man whose name was on the building, on our paychecks, on the plaque in the lobby that I passed every single morning. He'd founded the firm 27 years ago. He was 61, rarely came into the office anymore, and was, by all accounts, not someone you wanted to disappoint. "She works here," I said. "Started 8 months ago. Works out of the second floor, mostly on the development side. You didn't know?" Trent leaned back, arms crossed, clearly enjoying this. "Word is she was at the awards dinner Tuesday and left early. Nobody knows what happened after that." I said nothing. "Anyway," he said, standing up, "I'm just saying people are talking. People were talking." That was the part that caught up with me over the next 48 hours. I hadn't done anything wrong. I knew that. But I also knew how things looked, and how things looked sometimes mattered more than what was actually true. Friday afternoon, I got a message through the company's internal system. It was from Lydia Marsh. It said, "I think you were the one who helped me Tuesday night. Can we talk?" I replied, "Sure, whenever works for you." She came to the second floor, my floor, about an hour later. I recognized her the moment she appeared in the doorway of the open plan workspace. She was about 30, dark hair, composed in the way people are when they've had a few days to gather themselves after something embarrassing. She was carrying a coffee cup and looking around like she wasn't sure which desk was mine. I stood up. "Garrett," she said. "Yeah." "Lydia?" She nodded. "Can we go somewhere quieter?" We went to one of the small conference rooms near the copy area. She sat down across from me and put her coffee on the table. "I wanted to say thank you," she said. "And I wanted to say I'm sorry. I don't usually. That's not something I do. You don't have to explain anything to me. I want to." She looked at her coffee cup. "It was a hard night. There were some things happening at the dinner, personal stuff, and I made poor choices about how to deal with it. You didn't have to stop. Most people wouldn't have. My father would have," I said, "so I did." She smiled at that. "Small but real. He sounds like a good man." He was. There was a pause, not an uncomfortable one. "I looked you up," she said. "You're on the structural team. Morrison Project. And the Fielding warehouse conversion. I heard that one's giving people headaches. That's one word for it." She laughed. "Quiet." Then she stood up, extended her hand. "Thank you, Garrett. Genuinely." I shook it. "Glad you're okay." She left. I went back to my desk and sat there for a moment, thinking that that was probably the end of it. A nice story I'd tell once at a party, and then never think about again. I was wrong about that. 2 weeks later, a man named Sutton Cole started making noise. Sutton was 36, worked on the business development side, and had been at Caldwell & Fitch for 6 years. His uncle was one of the firm's early investors. Not a partner, but close enough that Sutton had always carried himself like the rules didn't apply to him in quite the same way they applied to everyone else. He had the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no in a professional setting, and he wore it openly like a second blazer. I'd had exactly 2 conversations with Fabrice for any of this happened. Neither of them had been memorable. The Friday after Lydia and I spoke, I was in the kitchen pouring coffee when Sutton came in with 2 other people from his team. He looked at me like he'd been waiting for the chance. "Holloway," he said. "You're the one who took Lydia home, right?" I turned around slowly. "I helped a colleague who needed it." "Yeah. To your apartment?" "To her apartment." He tilted his head like he was weighing something. "That's not what I heard." The 2 people with him said nothing. They were both looking at the floor. "I don't know what you heard," I said, "but I took her to her address and made sure she got inside." "That's it, sure," he said, smiling in a way that didn't reach anywhere. "Just seems like a weird thing to do. Stranger takes the boss's daughter home after a work event. No one knows where she went. Just seems like something that should be talked about." I picked up my coffee and walked out. I didn't say anything else. I'm not sure what I would have said. By the following Monday, it was clear that Sutton had been doing exactly what he'd said, talking about it. Not loudly, not in emails, but in the way that actually works, which is quietly, to the right people, in the right context. A word here. A raised eyebrow there. The particular kind of rumor that doesn't have specific claims because specific claims can be disproven. The Tuesday after that, my manager, a man named Doug Ferrara, called me into his office. Doug was a decent man and a fair manager, and he looked genuinely uncomfortable when I sat down across from him. "I want to be straight with you," he said. "There's been some talk about the situation with Martin's daughter. I know. I need to ask you directly. What happened?" I told him everything, exactly as it had happened. The parking garage, the business card, the drive to her, the door. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he nodded slowly. "Okay, I believe you. But I want you to understand that Martin hasn't been in the loop on this, and until he is, I need to be careful. I'm going to reassign you to the Braddock site team temporarily. It's just until things settle down." The Braddock site was 30 miles from the city center. It was a live construction site, loud and cold and mostly miserable in November. It was also, very clearly, a way of moving me out of the main building while the situation resolved itself, or didn't. I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger exactly, more like the quiet, slow-burning frustration of having done the right thing and watching it get turned inside out. I called my brother that night. He's a high school football coach in Colorado Springs and not the most emotionally expressive person on the planet, but he's steady, and sometimes steady is what you need. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to keep my head down and let it sort itself out." "That's probably the right call," he said. "Or you can go in there and say something." "And say what?" "That you're not going to be quiet about something you didn't do." I thought about that for a long time after I hung up. The Braddock site was for a mixed-use residential tower going up on the west side of Aurora. My role was technical review of foundation work and load-bearing documentation. It was actual work, real, useful work, but I was aware every day that I was there of how I'd ended up there, and why. I kept my phone on during lunch. I checked my messages. I did what I was supposed to do, and I didn't say anything I'd regret. 2 weeks in, I got a message from Lydia. I heard what happened with the reassignment. It wasn't supposed to happen. I stared at it for a moment, then typed, "Not your fault. I'm fine. It is my fault. Can I call you?" She called that evening. She explained that she'd found out through someone on the development team what Sutton had been saying, and that she'd already spoken to Doug directly and confirmed everything I'd told him. She sounded steady but frustrated, the way people sound when they're dealing with something that should have been simple. "I'm going to talk to my father," she said. "You don't have to do that, Garrett." Her voice was calm. "Someone is damaging your professional reputation at my father's company because of something you did to help me." "Yes, I do." I didn't argue. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until later, was that Sutton had already gotten to Martin Caldwell first. I heard this part secondhand from Doug, who told me afterward because he thought I deserved to know. Sutton had requested a meeting with Martin directly. He'd framed it as a concern, a protective impulse even. He'd said that he felt it was important that Martin know about what had happened at the awards dinner, and about the employee who had allegedly taken Lydia home under unclear circumstances. He'd been careful. He hadn't made outright accusations. He'd just planted the seed and stood back. Martin had listened. He didn't say much during the meeting, according to Doug, which was apparently characteristic of the man. He asked a few questions. He thanked Sutton for bringing it to his attention. What Sutton hadn't known, and what I hadn't known either, was that Lydia had already left her father a voicemail the same morning. She'd told him everything, exactly as it happened. She'd described the parking garage, the business card, the drive to her apartment, the fact that she'd been conscious and coherent enough to give me her address herself. She'd told him that the man who'd helped her was named Garrett Holloway, and that he was one of Doug's structural engineers, and that he hadn't asked for anything and hadn't done anything wrong. Martin had listened to that voicemail before Sutton walked into his office. So when Sutton sat down across from Martin Caldwell and started laying out his carefully worded concerns, Martin already knew the whole story. He just let Sutton finish, and then, from what Doug told me, Martin said something close to this: "I appreciate you bringing this to me. I'll look into it. I do want to ask you something, though. Why is it that the first version of this story I'm hearing from you is different from the version my daughter told me this morning?" Sutton, apparently, did not have a good answer for that. I was at the Braddock site, reviewing rebar placement documentation with one of the on-site supervisors when Doug called. "Can you come in tomorrow?" he said. "To the main office?" "Yeah, Martin wants to meet you." I put the documentation down on a folding table and stood very still for a second. "Okay," I said. "Don't overthink it," Doug said. "Just come in." I drove back to Denver that night and ironed a shirt for the first time in 2 weeks. Martin Caldwell's office was on the top floor of the building, not a large office actually, which surprised me. I'd expected something intimidating. What I found was a room with 2 windows, a lot of books, and a desk that looked like it had been through a few decades of actual use. He was standing when I came in, and he was shorter than I'd imagined, with gray hair and the kind of steady, direct eye contact that either means someone is genuinely listening or genuinely deciding. He reached out his hand. "Garrett, sit down." I sat. He sat across from me and folded his hands on the desk. "My daughter told me what you did. I wanted to hear it from you as well," I told him, same as I'd told Doug, same as I'd told myself every time I'd replayed it. He listened the whole way through without looking away. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I want to ask you something," he said. "When you found her in that stairwell, when you realized who she was, did that change anything about what you did?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I didn't know who she was until I found her business card, and by the time I did, she was already in my car." He nodded slowly. "Lydia said the same thing." Another pause, then, "I've been running this firm for 27 years. In that time, I've made a lot of decisions about a lot of people. And the ones I've regretted most were the ones where I let someone else's version of a story fill in the gaps before I'd heard the whole thing." He looked at me directly. "I should have spoken to you sooner. That's on me. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing, which felt right." "I'm reassigning you back to the main building Monday," he said. "Full caseload, and I'm going to handle the other matter separately. With Sutton, that's not something I'll discuss with you. But yes." He stood. I stood. We shook hands again. "Thank you for stopping," he said. "Most people wouldn't." "My father would have," I said. Same thing I'd told Lydia a few weeks earlier. Martin looked at me for a moment, then he raised. "You right." Sutton was gone from the firm by the end of the following week. There was no announcement, no all-hands email, no drama. He was simply there and then he wasn't. I heard later from Trent that he'd been offered a quiet exit and taken it. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want them. Doug stopped by my desk my first Monday back. "Good to have you here," he said, and didn't make it into anything bigger than that, which I appreciated. What I hadn't expected was Lydia. I'd assumed reasonably that the professional situation resolving itself would be the end of the story. We'd nod when we passed in the hallway. Maybe have a brief and friendly exchange at the coffee machine once or twice. That seemed like the appropriate outcome. Things return to normal, everyone moves on. But the week after I came back, Lydia messaged me again. "I know this is a little out of nowhere, but I'm going to a lecture at the Denver Art Museum Saturday. Someone presenting on adaptive reuse in urban architecture. I thought you might actually enjoy it. No pressure at all if it's weird." I read it twice. Then I typed, "It's not weird." "What time?" The lecture was genuinely interesting. A case study on a converted textile mill in the River North District that I'd actually driven past dozens of times without knowing the full history of. Lydia knew the presenter slightly, a woman who'd done her thesis on industrial conversions, and the three of us ended up in the museum cafe for almost 2 hours afterward, talking about load distribution in old brick structures and whether the city's zoning regulations had actually kept up with what developers were doing. On the walk to the parking lot, Lydia said, "This is probably the first time I've talked about cantilever tolerances on a Saturday night." "Obli." "Same," I said. She laughed. Then she stopped walking for a second. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. When you helped me in the parking garage, you didn't even hesitate. I know you said your dad raised you that way. But most people pause. Most people calculate." She looked at me. "You just stopped." I thought about it. "I think when you wait to decide if someone deserves help, you've already made a decision," I said, "and it's usually the wrong one." She was quiet for a moment. "Then your dad would have liked you, did?" I said. "Mostly." She laughed again. And we stood there in the parking lot of the Denver Art Museum in November, and the city was lit up all around us, and I thought about how strange it is, the way a single moment in a stairwell can unspool into a whole other life if you let it. We had dinner the following Friday, and the Friday after that. I won't say it was simple. Nothing about the early months was. There were people at work who raised eyebrows, and Lydia was careful in a way I understood, because her situation was more complicated than mine in ways that had nothing to do with me. She was Martin Caldwell's daughter and a senior associate at his firm, and every choice she made was watched by people with opinions. But she was also someone who had thanked me genuinely, and called Sutton out before she had to, and taken me to a lecture on adaptive reuse on a Saturday night, and seemed happy about it. And I'd been alone in Denver for 4 years by that point, and I was tired of working late and eating Thai food by myself. So we figured it out. The last thing my father told me before he died, I was 27, he was 60, it was too soon by any measure, was that the best thing you can be in this world is useful. Not impressive, not successful, useful. He said it like it was simple, like most things he believed. I think about that every time something good happens to me. I think about the parking garage, and the business card, and the drive across town on a Tuesday night in October. I think about how close I came to not opening that stairwell door, to telling myself it wasn't my problem, to calculating whether the risk was worth it. I'm glad I didn't calculate.